Good afternoon, friends. I'm Stephen Makk, and I'd like to be your PPC candidate for the riding of Simcoe North in the upcoming federal election. Actually, what I really want to be is your Member of Parliament for Simcoe North. That doesn't just mean that I want your vote today and in October, but also for you to tell me what I should be doing and how I should do it. I'm not exactly here to tell you what I'm going to do or how I think I do it. I do have my own ideas, of course, but I'm also here for you to tell me what's important and what I should be concerned with and what ought to be done in Ottawa. Democracy cannot be a once every 5 years trip to the local community center on election day. That just plays into the hands of those who don't really take you seriously. What I'd like to see is more participation all the time. When citizens get involved, we have less need for government. Less government means more freedom for everybody, except tyrants and busybodies, and more money in your hands at the end of the day to do the good things that you want to do for yourself, your family, your community, or wherever that you want, anywhere in the world. Now, I want to be your representative to take care of the business that needs doing in Ottawa on your behalf. But I understand that government, when done right, ends up being a small, affordable, and hopefully unexciting part of everybody's life. Government is a big, blunt, and usually awkwardly handled instrument. We all have our own individual needs, wants, and aspirations. What we need from the system is maximum personalization, not one size that fits all, or one ideology for all. Many others see government as a big hulking gorilla that they want to somehow harness and use to beat up on people or entities that they don't like, while getting people who are not really involved in a dispute to pay for that ever-hungry gorilla's feeding. The PPC wants to get to the root of this overarching problem. Although we do have specific platform positions, those are secondary. What we are offering is a different method, a different set of principles, and a whole new way of looking at what government is supposed to do and how. Most of all, we want to get government's nose out of business they need not be in, its hands out of your wallet, and its snoops, busybodies, and scolds away from your internet. Before I go further, I'd like to point out that I'm speaking here on my own behalf. Although I know the PPC platform pretty well and agree with it, I'm not exactly speaking on behalf of the PPC at this particular moment. I'm here to show you what I think, how I think, and using the PPC and politics in general as the topic. This is all okay, because the PPC is a free speech party that understands that in a representative democracy, which, by the way, Canada still kind of is, in case we've forgotten, we have to be open to the widest possible variety of views. Unlike all the other parties, the PPC allows candidates to have their own personal views on topics that the PPC has decided not to get involved with, and even to disagree with the PPC's policies themselves, as long as the disagreement is pursued in a reasonable, fair, and respectful manner. We actually celebrate diversity, by which I mean diversity of thought, and don't just virtue signal about it in general terms, like the other two parties. By other two parties, I mean the two winged beasts called the Libcons and the Green DP. Anyway, this is the first time most of you have heard of me or have seen me. And apart from a few brief phone conversations, few of you have spoken to me. So let me introduce who I am. I consider myself a privileged person. You might ask, why would I say such a loaded thing in this politically correct day and age? No, it's not that I'm a straight white male capitalist, although I won't deny any of that or check any of that. I am privileged by virtue of being born and raised in this great country of Canada, just shy of 2 decades after World War II. I'm privileged to have been able to live a life of peace, free from war, worry, or want. I'm privileged to have enjoyed good health, to have earned a good education in a public school system and at the University of Toronto, and to have been able to pursue a career in engineering for over 30 years now. I'm privileged to have been married for over 34 years to my wife and business partner, Rena, over there, and to have raised two self-sufficient, competent, and kind sons whose company I enjoy and whose advice I often seek. I, too, have worked in electronics technology and manufacturing for over 30 years as an employee of various companies, as an executive at a $100+ million a year company in the USA, and I've started a few companies of my own, both in Canada and the USA. The closest I've come until now to any political involvement was membership in the US government's National Electronics Manufacturing Initiative, headed by Al Gore, back in the mid-90s. There, I advocated that the radio spectrum should be viewed as a sort of public park or public space, and that large corporations should not be granted monopoly over the use of radio spectrum. That went over like a fart in church, I'll tell you. Along the way, I've hired hundreds of people, and I've fired a few too. I've had ups, and I've had some big downs, and I've learned from both. Rarely has government or its regulations been of much help. I love to learn new things, solve tricky problems, invent stuff, and make things with my own hands. I have a couple of patents for various electronic inventions. I have negotiated complex contracts with teams of lawyers from multinational companies at the other side of the table. I'd be fine arguing it out with Mr. Scheer's minions, or Justin's fembots. I admit I date myself with that ancient Star Trek reference, which was what the Austin Powers thing was built on. I'm known for reading every word of a contract and being a stickler for detail. As an MP, I would read every word of every bill brought forward and make sure nothing sneaky is being slipped in and that no wording is ambiguous or dangerous. Now, the last few years, I've lived and worked in Victoria Harbour on the shores of beautiful Georgian Bay. I spent all my childhood summers at the family cottage on that body of water, and I want to live the rest of my years on the shores of my happy place. I bought Victoria Harbour's historic former City Hall and made it my office and laboratory. I live mere steps away. I still work really late hours, but at least, unlike all those tedious years in Toronto, I can see stars at night on my late night walks home. My company designs and manufactures advanced electronics products for other companies mostly. You can buy my designs at Best Buy and various places on the internet. I am really proud to say that we are currently manufacturing consumer electronics products right here in Simcoe North and exporting them in large quantities to the USA, and get this, China and Japan. Many have called me nuts for even attempting such a thing, but I know it is possible. I just go ahead and do it, because this is Canada, and we do hard things. Oh, yeah, I like to play guitar, go boating, fishing, play with my cat, drink beer, eat spicy food, and read. But what about my politics? Well, let's just start at the top. I believe that the sovereignty and liberty of the individual is the paramount foundation of natural law, and as a result should be the primary guide for all governments. None of the pre-existing parties seem to believe in this. The default stance should be to let people do what they want. That means minimal interference, minimal regulation, and minimal taxation. However, I'm not a doctrinaire libertarian. I see a positive supporting role for government in human flourishing, because there are simply some things that are done better collectively and cooperatively. In those areas, the role of government must be well-defined, strictly limited, and regularly reviewed. Freedom. Of the various PPC principles, freedom is my guiding star. And by that, I mean individual freedom. I consider myself beyond being just a free speech absolutist. I consider free speech and free expressions of one's own truthful thoughts not just a right, but an obligation of every citizen. When they say you don't have the right to yell fire in a crowded theater, they're right most of the time. However, If there's an actual fire, I'd say you have the responsibility to yell as loud as you can. Funny how they always seem to forget that very important option. I say, debate, not hate. A key Enlightenment invention was free speech, including Speaker's Corner, and the free, bubbling, boiling public square, and boisterous parliament. When people are free to speak, they do not need to resort to violence. I've had some Twitter storms with some Liberal candidates from around here about so-called online violence or violent speech in tweets, and anyway, I'm active in that area. Yeah, so what about the crazies that the libcons, the media, and just what everybody has been trying to brainwash you into being afraid of? You know, those boogeymen, racists, xenophobes, misogynists, supremacists, Islamophobes. You notice how the imaginary bad guy straw man is always a boogeyman and not a boogie woman? They're dead sexists, aren't they? Okay, I admit, boogie woman makes me think of rap videos, so maybe it's actually racist? Call it culture is so much fun, I really have to resist the temptation. I'd like to sort of plagiarize an NRA slogan for this sort of thing, and that is, the best defense against a stupid guy with a bad idea is a smart guy with a better idea. When you hear someone say something you don't like, do you go running to mommy and ask her to make them stop? Now, assuming they're not waving a gun at you, go to the speaker yourself and have a word with them. If they won't talk to you, then maybe you need to speak to others to tell them your thoughts on the matter so they have something better to compare with if they encounter the bad guy ideas. But don't shout them down, and don't go beat them up. Don't text Antifa to go get them, and most important of all, don't go lobby guerrilla mommy government to beat them up on your behalf using policemen and bureaucrats. Separation. I'm not talking Quebec here, please. I like the Enlightenment concept of separation. First, the state was separated from monarchs, kings and queens. We retain a symbolic vestige of monarchy. In our perhaps cute Canadian way, we say, in the name of Her Majesty, instead of the American way of saying, we the people. Yeah, that's okay for pompous documents and ceremonies. Then, we saw the separation of church and state, which clearly worked out very well. I'll let you know, state and church are both doing okay after the divorce, and we have all more freedom as a result. What a great invention, that separation. Listen to Max, and you can tell that the next one is separation of business and state. No more corporate welfare. No more supply management. We don't need any of that. I'm also a staunch believer in free markets. As an extension of the freedom of the individual and their right to control their own body comes their personal right to have property, especially the property that they have, in a sense, sacrificed their body and time to create or earn. These rights are maximized when an individual has a right to freely set their price, that is, to sell their labor or property at a price they agree to, which, very importantly, includes the right to not sell it if the buyer will not accept and offer an acceptable price. All trade must be voluntary. I'm against all forms of price controls, be they minimum wages, be they maximum wages, rent controls, supply management, closed union shops, or any of that. Anytime you distort the market, you create waste and become vulnerable to competition by the less wasteful. Please, everybody, don't fall for the popular notion and propaganda that the government runs the economy. It doesn't. It can meddle in it, usually with ample unintended negative consequences. But federal politicians have the conceit that they can improve your economic situation, maybe even with the bonus of economically harming people you don't like. A free market is an amazing distributed processing computer. It almost magically finds the optimal price for everything, everywhere, through competition, communication, and cooperation, as needed. No government can come close to doing that as well, as the 20th century has surely demonstrated. And sorry, Mr. Trump, countries don't trade. People and certain voluntary groups of people called companies trade. Governments decide to get in the way of trade sometimes. It is better that they do not. Free trade may have negative consequences for short periods in specific places, and governments need to help with that sometimes, and temporarily. But overall, trade and freedom lift all boats. As a bonus, countries that have healthy trade between them almost never go to war with each other. Go and look up the history. Now, whether to trade with people and companies in other countries is a decision individuals and the companies they have ownership in have to make. That is where responsibility comes in behind freedom, to make sure freedom is not wasted or abused. Now, the next separation is the separation of charity and state. Governments seem to have taken over the monopoly on charity. Let's eliminate individual dependency on the state. In my ideal world, the government never writes a check to anybody except in return for something of value to the people, namely goods and services needed for the functioning of government. And similarly, no citizen should have to pay the state, by that I mean pay taxes, except in exchange for something of understandable and tangible value to people overall. And let's definitely have separation of the media and the state. Yes, the government needs to have a voice to freely communicate with the people, but it should do this directly and not through indirect mouthpieces. And it should never manipulate or apply misdirection towards the people. Defund the CBC, and do not subsidize any media organizations. The $60 million going to ailing traditional media is an affront to both the separation of state from business and to the separation of state from media. It's just more jobs for slobs. This time, nice air-conditioned jobs. Justin's dad, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, said a wise thing I liked. He said the state has no place in the bedrooms of the nation. Now that means another kind of separation. That means separation of state from personal sexuality, love, and emotion. Recently, the Liberals introduced a virtue signaling law saying all federally regulated workplaces must provide free feminine hygiene products. Hey Justin, listen to your dad. I think he would probably want you to stay out of the nation's bathrooms too. Now, the People's Party is avoiding setting policies related to personal morality. I really like that Maxime Bernier has been totally open and willing to say no on many topics. He'll say, our party will have no policy for that. Because in many areas, no policy is in fact needed. Government becomes a hammer looking for nails. Once a program starts, especially if it's heavily staffed, even when it's super successful, it's almost impossible to dissolve. You hear all sorts of demonstrative compassion. Oh, for the poor government workers' jobs. You know, idle hands do the work of the devil, as they say. And those hands and brains belong in a thriving private sector. You know, the important policies are stuff you should have learned in kindergarten. Don't hurt people. No hitting or biting. Don't take their stuff. Don't wreck things. Share your toys. Wait your turn, and so on. Because it follows principles like that, the PPC can have the courage to simply say no. When going down a list of issues, or so-called issues, we're the only ones that say nope. No need to get involved in that. Just because somebody out there has strong feelings about something doesn't necessarily make it important. We need to separate governments from each other too, like we sometimes have to separate angry toddlers from each other. Our Constitution pretty clearly sets out a separation of powers between the federal and provincial levels. There's a similar separation between provincial and municipal. Hierarchical organizations and division of labor are smart approaches to solving big problems, so I am all for that. However, I do wish to limit the number of levels of government overall and not have one level meddle in the A lot of Canadian political squabbles are over the separation of powers. The PPC respects the Constitution. Healthcare and education are clearly provincial matters. Things like defense, railways, trade, and infrastructure, yes, like pipelines, are clearly federal matters. It's not so important which level of government is made responsible for something, and I admit that the Canada Act has some weird choices, but the important thing is that we don't have both levels dealing with the same thing. The PPC addresses this in its policy planks on equalization and healthcare. I'd love to answer your questions on those later. Finally, I think the most important thing to be separated from the state is groups. I believe the state should ignore group identities and ignore all interest groups. There should be no such thing as group rights. If you're going to have a state and a government, the relationship between the citizen and the state should be as direct as possible. Maxime Bernier has repeatedly demonstrated that this is quite easy to do. I admit that pandering to groups is something we have become so accustomed to seeing the other parties do all the time, and we're blinded to it. But yes, it can be avoided. So sorry, corporations, unions, churches, charities, mosques, ethnic associations, lobbyists, media organizations, sports teams, environmentalists, NGOs, the UN, don't knock on our door. Don't visit, and no, don't even take a number. We won't give you a call. You're free to speak, and we're free to listen, or not. Convince the citizens, not the government. In other words, talk to my bosses. I'm busy doing work. When governments become a monopoly on something, it erases all price signals. As a result, you cannot freely bid on scarce resources, but now have to lobby or otherwise gain influence. That is what is happening in Ottawa and our provincial capitals all the time. This is not good. The PPC is dedicated to stopping this nonsense. There are only two kinds of identity groups that should matter when making laws. One is the group consisting of all Canadians lumped together and considered with equal weight, and the other valid kind of group, and there are over 30 million of them, is the individual Canadian. Anything in between should simply be ignored. To sum up, unlike political libertarians, I'm against tyranny of all kinds. Not just the things that the horrible left and right-wing government tyrannies my European parents fled as refugees during World War II, but also tyrannies of religion, tyrannies of unethical or monopolistic corporations, tyrannies of the mob, like political correctness, especially online, and especially those tyrannies that make one censor their own thoughts. When that happens, the enemy has breached the walls of the sacred castle keep of individual conscience and consciousness. That attack must be repelled. That is job number one. Like many of you, I assume, I have been disenchanted by or underwhelmed by the traditional parties. I never felt that I had a home in Canadian mainstream politics. I have usually voted Conservative, or before that PC, but have voted Libertarian when that option was available provincially. At those times, man, my vote was for the least of many minor evils, or some really crappy little devils. These days, it's especially frustrating. All the parties are so very close to each other. If you step back and try to take an objective look, especially if you compare things to the rest of the world, they've all clustered to the left and towards statism, authoritarianism along the other political axis. I think that all this talk of vote splitting we're hearing is a bit silly and is a symptom of a certain blindness. I mean, does it really matter which wing of the LibCon party you pick? Airplane food, hospital food. Who cares? It all sucks. I guess you have a third creepy vegetarian option with the Greens. Now, when Makk formed the People's Party, my ears perked up. Rena and I both went, now there's something I can get behind. And I started to pay close attention. Holy crap, I was getting interested in politics, beyond just complaining about the same old, same old. Do you know that 40% of Canadians do not even vote in a federal election? Maybe the lack of true choice and disconnection from reality of the legacy parties is the problem. Those 40%, many of them are people like you and I. people who have principles and who haven't found a political home. Those are the people we need to reach. That, by the way, is the way the PPC will get some big numbers. We're not just a crazy right-edge rump of the grumpy ex-conservatives. We're a broader thing than that. When you're opening to disconnecting from wide ranges of unimportant issues altogether, you're also less likely to unnecessarily piss off voters. And by the way, I think what Scheer did to Max in the Conservative leadership race was unethical, decidedly unfree market, and decidedly unconservative. I can't vote for a party like that. They're as beholden to interest groups as the Liberals are. Food cartel or SNC-Lavalin, airplane food, hospital food, same problem, different color ties, or wait, more colorful or less colorful socks. I have so much more I want to share. I see you guys are getting sleepy, but I confess I tend to talk too much, talk for too long, because I get excited by this kind of stuff. I didn't have enough time to write a short speech, so all I was able to do was rush together this very long one. I think it's better that we now end in half time. You ask the questions, and I do my best, and Dan does his best, to show you how we can handle them. But before I wrap up, I'd like to relate a thought that came to me a while back, hiking recently through the Y Marsh, that's just outside Midland, here in Simcoe North. If you haven't been there, you really should go visit, it's beautiful. Anyway, I thought Barrie's politicians, mostly American, they keep talking about draining the swamp. And for a moment I thought, wow, hey, that's what the PPC is going to do in Ottawa. And then I thought again, you know, swamps and marshes can be beautiful places, full of interesting plants and animals. And our Canadian wetlands are 100% naturally alligator-free. No, let's not insult swamps by comparing them to our political system. What we really need to do is pump that septic tank. After all the waste in government is of human origin, and it's really built up way too high, and is starting to really stink, so the metaphor is apt. It's a dirty job ahead of us, and you can't just leave it for another 5 years, or it's going to blow up and overflow. So please, pick me as your PPC candidate for Simcoe North. I want to go join Max's pump out and cleanup team. PPC, strong and free. Thanks.